The cold void of space was filled with the hum of the cloaked human ship, drifting silently towards the abandoned alien station. Captain Ethan Wells, leader of a small reconnaissance unit, was a man of action, but today he was a man of caution. His fingers gripped the edge of his seat as he watched the station's exterior grow larger on the ship's monitors. The alien empire they had been fighting against had used this once thriving spaceport as their headquarters, but the silence now was unsettling. "Stay sharp, Captain," his AI assistant, Mara, warned. "We're deep inside enemy territory. One wrong move, and we're done for." Wells nodded, his hand adjusting the cloaking device settings. "Understood, Mara. Just get us close enough to find out what they're hiding." As the human ship glided undetected through the station's defensive perimeter, Wells' thoughts lingered on the mission. The intel suggested something hidden deep within the station, something that could turn the tide of the war in their favor. No one knew what it was, but every sign pointed to a secret that could shift the balance of power. Yet, the most intriguing part was a strange transmission intercepted days earlier, one that spoke of a prisoner held within. He set the ship to hover, eyes scanning the station's perimeter. His heart pounded as the air around him crackled with the static of enemy communication. He wasn't alone. The Empire had left enough troops to guard this place, but it didn't matter. Wells wasn't here for a fight. He was here to get answers. The ship's stealth technology hummed, barely noticeable, as they slipped past a group of patrolling enemy ships. They had no idea the human forces were even near. Wells' pulse quickened as they reached their destination, an isolated sector of the station where no ships were docked. He opened the hatch and made his way to the airlock. "Once we board, we won't have long," Mara warned. "Get in, find the prisoner, and get out." Wells stepped into the docking bay, his boots hitting the cold metal floor. The station was eerily quiet, as if it had been abandoned for years, but Wells knew better. The Empire wasn't one to leave their holdings undefended. He moved swiftly, using every shadow, every corner, to remain unseen. His cloak rendered him almost invisible, a ghost in the station's halls. After what felt like an eternity, Wells reached the main prison chamber. His eyes scanned the surroundings, and then he saw her. She was chained to a wall, a young alien girl, barely in her 20s, with long, dark hair and striking features. Her eyes met his, fearful, yet filled with a strange kind of defiance. Wells froze for a moment, not sure what to make of the situation. He had been trained to expect enemy soldiers or machines. Not this. She was alone. Weak, it seemed, but her presence here was important. The transmission had been right. This was the prisoner. He stepped closer, cautious but determined. "Are you all right?" he asked in a whisper. The girl didn't respond, her eyes darting around nervously. Wells knew the Empire was cruel, but this was something else. She was more than just a prisoner. There was something different about her, something that didn't fit into the cold calculations of war. As he approached her, the station's AI suddenly spoke through his earpiece. "Captain, leave the area immediately." The voice urged, more forceful than before. "This prisoner is a trap. You're wasting time." Wells ignored the warning. This wasn't a trap. Something about the girl called to him. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't leave her behind. "Mara, we need to extract her. Now." Before Mara could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Alien soldiers were closing in. Wells had no time to hesitate. He used his energy weapon to cut the chains that bound the girl, and with a swift motion, he pulled her toward him. "Come with me now," he barked. The girl's eyes widened, and for the first time, she spoke in a language Wells couldn't understand. Her voice was soft but urgent, filled with panic. "Mara, what is she saying?" Wells asked, glancing at his AI assistant. Translation: "She's asking if you're going to save her," Mara replied. "But Captain, you're walking into a trap. You need to leave. Now." Wells looked at the girl, realizing that she wasn't just some helpless prisoner. She was royal. There was an aura about her that couldn't be mistaken. She was not just a casualty of war. She was a symbol of something much greater. "No time for this. We've got to move," Wells urged, pulling her toward the exit. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the station. The sound of blaring alarms echoed through the halls. The enemy had detected them. The girl, still in a daze, clung to Wells as they sprinted down the narrow corridors. But it was too late. The station's countdown had already begun. It was on a self-destruct course, and Wells had just triggered it. As the countdown clock flashed before them, Wells turned to the girl, his hand on her shoulder. "We're getting out of here, I promise you." But with every second that ticked away, Wells knew they weren't just running from a self-destruct. They were running from the Empire's wrath, a wrath that would stop at nothing to destroy them both. Wells barely had time to think as he pulled the girl, Lyra, through the dark, winding corridors of the station. Her steps were unsure, her face pale with fear. She didn't speak, didn't ask anything, but Wells could feel her eyes on him, studying him with a mix of awe and confusion. The weight of the situation was pressing down on him, and every moment seemed to stretch longer than the last. The distant sound of enemy soldiers searching for them was growing louder, echoing through the metal hallways. Wells quickened his pace, gripping Lyra's arm tightly as they moved deeper into the station, using every shadow to hide their presence. The cloaking device on his suit kept them hidden, but for how long? The station was on the verge of destruction, and every second brought them closer to being caught. "Mara, how much time do we have?" Wells whispered into his communicator. "Not much, Captain," Mara's calm voice replied. "The self-destruct is set for 15 minutes. If you don't hurry, you'll both be dead before you even reach the ship." Wells cursed under his breath. Time was running out, and the girl, Lyra, was slowing them down. She had no idea how to navigate the complex systems of the station, no understanding of the urgency of the situation. She seemed lost in the chaos, her mind reeling from everything that had happened in the past few minutes. Wells wanted to yell at her to move faster, but he held back. This wasn't her fault. She was a prisoner, and he had just dragged her into a war that was not hers to fight. "Stay close," Wells said firmly, his voice low and commanding. "You'll be safe, I promise." But Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she glanced around nervously, her eyes darting from one shadow to another, as if she were expecting the entire station to collapse around them. Her fear was palpable, and Wells could feel it pressing in on him. He couldn't blame her. He had just saved her from the alien forces, and now they were both running for their lives. But even in the face of all this danger, there was something about her that drew him in, something that made him feel like he couldn't leave her behind. "You don't have to come with me," Wells said suddenly, looking at her. "I can get you out of here, but if you want to go your own way, I won't stop you." Lyra stopped in her tracks, staring at him in disbelief. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head slightly. "You think I have a choice?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with disbelief. "You think I could survive out there alone?" Wells' heart sank. He had expected her to fight, to demand answers, but instead, she had accepted the truth with a simple question. She was just as trapped as he was, caught in a war that wasn't hers, with no escape in sight. Her people, her family, had been destroyed by the very empire that had enslaved her. Wells had no idea what her past was, but he could see the scars in her eyes, the trauma that had shaped her into the person she was today. She wasn't just some helpless girl. She was a survivor. "I didn't ask for this," Lyra continued, her voice shaky but resolute. "But I'll follow you. You're the only chance I have left." Wells nodded, his jaw tightening. "Good. Stick with me, and I'll get you out of here." They continued moving through the station, the distant echoes of enemy soldiers growing louder with every step. Wells was calculating their next move, trying to figure out how they could make it to the ship in time. The ship's cloaking device was their only advantage, but it wouldn't matter if they didn't reach it before the station went up in flames. The sound of boots pounding on metal floors suddenly shattered the silence. Wells froze, pressing himself and Lyra against the wall. He could see the shadows of the alien soldiers approaching, their heavy footsteps reverberating in the hall. His pulse quickened. They were so close. "Get down," Wells hissed, pulling Lyra lower, flattening both of them against the cold metal. He reached for his weapon, a sleek energy rifle that was far too heavy for comfort, but necessary for situations like this. His fingers brushed against it, and he knew they couldn't afford to fight their way out. The best option was to remain hidden and pray the enemy passed them by. The soldiers' footsteps slowed, and Wells held his breath. The tension in the air was thick, and Lyra's hand tightened around his. Her fear was contagious, but Wells kept his composure. He couldn't let her see how scared he was. Not now. The soldiers passed, oblivious to their presence, and Wells let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He glanced at Lyra, whose face was ashen, her eyes wide with the shock of what had just happened. She looked at him, then away, as if trying to make sense of everything. "Why did you save me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." Wells didn't answer right away. What could he say? The truth was, he didn't know. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, the way she carried herself with a quiet dignity despite everything she had been through. Maybe it was just the feeling that despite everything, he couldn't leave her to die alone. "I didn't have a choice," Wells finally said, his voice low. "You're not the enemy. You never were." Lyra didn't reply. She just nodded, as if understanding something he couldn't quite put into words. They stood there for a moment, two people from two very different worlds, bound together by circumstance and the chaos of war. Wells had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: they had to survive. For now, that was all that mattered. They moved again, slowly and carefully, the weight of the station's countdown heavy on their shoulders. They had a long way to go, and not much time to get there. The self-destruct clock was ticking down faster now, and Wells knew they had to make it to the ship before it was too late. But deep down, he knew that this reluctant alliance between him and Lyra was only the beginning. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Wells felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. The cold air of the abandoned world seemed to press against Wells as he and Lyra made their way through the alien ruins. Their feet crunched against the dry, cracked ground, the desolate landscape stretching out endlessly in every direction. The once thriving city was nothing more than a shadow of its former self, buildings reduced to rubble, their structures now nothing more than skeletons of what they used to be. Wells didn't like it here. There was something off about the place, something that set his instincts on edge. But it was their only chance. Lyra, on the other hand, was unusually quiet. She had been silent for most of their journey, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Wells had tried to speak to her, but she always seemed lost in thought. He couldn't blame her. After all, everything she had known had been taken from her: her family, her home, her freedom. She was alone now, and it wasn't just the alien empire that had caused her suffering. It was the entire galaxy, and Wells knew that somehow he had to help her find her place in it. "Are you sure this is the place?" Wells asked, glancing over at Lyra as they moved through the ruins. "This is where the map led us." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Yes," she said softly, "it's here. The weapon is hidden beneath the surface. My people built it long ago. It's the only thing that can stop the Empire." Wells frowned. The idea of a weapon that could defeat an entire alien empire was both thrilling and terrifying. He didn't know what to expect, but he had to trust Lyra. She was the key to it all. They had no other choice. As they neared the entrance to an underground complex, Wells felt a strange sense of unease. The air seemed heavier here, as if the very ground beneath them was holding its breath. Lyra, however, didn't seem to notice. She moved confidently toward the entrance, her eyes focused, her mind set on the task at hand. They reached a large stone door that looked ancient, its surface covered in strange alien symbols. Wells studied them for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He didn't know what they meant, but Lyra seemed to understand. She stepped forward, her hand brushing over the door, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the door slowly began to slide open, revealing a dark corridor leading down into the depths of the earth. Wells followed Lyra inside, the darkness swallowing them whole. His flashlight cast long shadows on the walls as they descended deeper into the heart of the complex. The air grew colder, and Wells could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something about this place felt wrong, like they were walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. The weapon they were searching for was their only hope of surviving the Empire's wrath. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, circular room. The walls were lined with strange machines and glowing alien symbols, their meaning just as mysterious as the rest of this place. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a small, crystalline object pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the object. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "The weapon. It's a key, a device that can destroy the Empire's AI network. My people built it to protect us, but when the Empire came, they took it from us." Wells studied the crystal carefully. It was beautiful, but he didn't understand how something so small could have such power. "What do we need to do?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer right away. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface of the crystal. "It needs blood," she said quietly. "My blood." Wells looked at her in confusion. "Your blood? What does that mean?" "The weapon was designed to be activated by my bloodline," Lyra explained. "Only someone from my family can awaken its power. If I give my blood to the crystal, it will unlock its full potential, and the weapon will be ready to use." Wells was silent for a moment, processing what she had just said. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but this was something else entirely. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This could kill you." Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but filled with determination. "I know, but if we don't do this, everything will be lost. The Empire will crush us all, and nothing will ever change. This is the only way to stop them." Wells didn't like it. He didn't like the idea of her sacrificing herself for the greater good. But he couldn't deny that she was right. The Empire had taken everything from them, and this was their chance to strike back. If they didn't act now, they might never get another opportunity. Without another word, Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on the crystal. She closed her eyes, and a faint glow began to pulse from the crystal, growing brighter with each passing second. Wells watched, his heart racing, as the crystal's light grew more intense, until it illuminated the entire room. He could hear the sound of the crystal humming, a low, vibrating noise that seemed to reverberate through his bones. Then, with a sudden flash, the crystal emitted a powerful burst of energy, sending waves of light rippling outward. Wells staggered back, shielding his eyes from the intense glow. When the light faded, the crystal was gone, leaving behind only a faint, glowing symbol etched into the pedestal. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her breathing heavy. Wells rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he helped her stand. "You did it," he whispered. "You activated it." Lyra nodded weakly, her face pale but determined. "It's done. The weapon is ready, but we still have one problem." Wells raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "The Empire knows we're here," Lyra said, her voice low. "We don't have much time before they arrive." Wells cursed under his breath. They had activated the weapon, but now they had to escape. Fast. The Empire would stop at nothing to take them down, and with the weapon in their hands, they were more dangerous than ever. The real fight was just beginning. Wells and Lyra barely had time to catch their breath before the alarms began to blare. their harsh shrill echoing through the underground corridors. The sound was unmistakable, an alert. The Empire knew they were here. There was no more running, no more hiding. They had to face the consequences of their actions now, and they had to do it quickly. "Go, go, go," Wells shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the exit. The weight of the weapon's power hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of what they were about to do. They had unlocked the secret, and now they had to use it. The Empire had taken everything from them, and now it was time to take something back. They sprinted through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the alarms and the growing chaos around them. Wells had no idea how much time they had left, but he knew one thing for sure. They had to make it to the heart of the Empire. The weapon was their only chance. If they didn't get it to the central command station, the Empire would crush them, and everything they had worked for would be lost. Lyra stumbled behind him, but Wells didn't slow down. The fear in her eyes was evident, but there was also a spark of something else, determination. She had been a prisoner for most of her life, but now she was free, and that freedom was worth fighting for. Wells couldn't help but admire her strength. She had been through so much, and yet she still kept moving forward, one step after another. As they reached the surface, Wells paused for a moment to scan the area. The world around them was a battlefield. Alien warships hovered overhead, their sleek forms cutting through the sky, while ground troops in full armor marched across the scared landscape. The Empire was everywhere, and they were closing in fast. Wells pulled out his weapon, checking it quickly before holstering it again. He didn't have time to engage in a firefight. He needed to get to the heart of the Empire, and fast. Lyra looked up at him, her expression tense, but there was a new sense of purpose in her eyes. "This way," Wells said, pointing toward a nearby mountain range. The entrance to the Empire's central command was hidden deep inside the mountains, and they had to get there before it was too late. Lyra nodded, and they set off at a run. The journey through the rugged terrain was grueling. The mountains were steep and jagged, and the rocky landscape made every step feel like an uphill battle. Wells could feel the sweat pouring down his back, his muscles aching from the effort. But he didn't stop. Not now. Not when the future of everything they had fought for was on the line. As they neared the entrance to the Empire's command station, Wells saw the unmistakable signs of Imperial forces. The area was heavily guarded, and the security was almost impossible to breach. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far to fail. "We need to get inside," Wells muttered, scanning the perimeter. He noticed a small maintenance hatch hidden in the side of the mountain, partially obscured by rocks. It was their only chance. "I'll cover you," Lyra said, stepping forward with a look of resolve on her face. Wells hesitated for a moment. "Cover me. You've never done anything like this before." His voice was soft, but there was concern behind it. He had no idea what Lyra was capable of, but this wasn't just any kind of fight. They were up against the heart of the Empire itself. "I've had to learn a lot to survive," she said, her voice steady. "I may not be a soldier, but I know what's at stake." Wells nodded, unable to argue with that. She was right. They didn't have time for doubts. Every second they spent hesitating was a second closer to the Empire's forces catching up to them. "All right," Wells said, adjusting his gear. "Stay close. I'll get us in." They moved quickly, crouching low behind the rocks, using the shadows to their advantage. The guards at the entrance were oblivious to their presence, and after a tense few minutes, Wells had successfully bypassed the security system. He pushed open the maintenance hatch, revealing a narrow tunnel that led deep into the heart of the Empire's command center. Wells motioned for Lyra to follow, and they slipped inside. The darkness of the tunnel swallowed them up, but Wells didn't slow down. They had no idea how long they had before the Empire realized they were here, and every second counted. Lyra's presence beside him gave him a strange sense of hope. They were still alive. They had made it this far. There had to be a way to finish this. As they moved through the tunnel, the walls seemed to close in around them. The air was thick with the scent of machinery and old metal, and every footstep echoed in the silence. Wells couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Empire had eyes everywhere, and it wouldn't be long before they realized that something was wrong. "We're close," Lyra said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "The main control room is just ahead. It's where the heart of the Empire's AI network is stored." Wells nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The final confrontation was drawing closer, and he was ready. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. They reached the control room doors, and Wells paused, listening for any signs of movement on the other side. The tension was unbearable. This was it, the heart of the Empire, where everything they had been fighting for would either be destroyed or restored. There was no more room for mistakes. "Ready?" Wells asked, his voice steady despite the nerves running through him. Lyra took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do this." With a single, decisive motion, Wells kicked open the door, and they rushed inside. What lay beyond was the core of the Empire's power, a massive, glowing structure that hummed with energy. In the center of the room, a large console blinked with data, the heart of the AI network pulsing like a living entity. Wells knew what he had to do. He didn't look back at Lyra. "Hold them off," he ordered. "I'll take care of the rest." As he moved toward the console, he knew that everything was about to change. There was no going back now. This was the heart of the Empire. And in this room, the fate of everything rested in their hands. The room hummed with energy as Wells approached the console at the center of the Empire's heart. His mind was racing, adrenaline surging through his veins as he prepared for what was to come. Every step he took felt like it echoed through the entire building. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was standing at the precipice. Lyra was by his side, her eyes locked on the control room's entrance, ready to fend off any Imperial forces that might try to stop them. Her hand gripped her weapon tightly, and her expression was focused, though there was a hint of fear in her eyes. She knew what was at stake. They all did. But despite the fear, she was determined. Wells couldn't help but feel a rush of admiration for her. She had come so far, from a helpless slave girl to the key to ending the Empire's reign. He reached the console and immediately began working on it. His fingers flew across the controls, searching for the system's core, the heart of the AI network that ran the Empire's machines, warships, and troops. The system was vast, its reach stretching across the galaxy. If he could break it, the Empire would be crippled. But that was no easy task. The AI was designed to be unbreakable, its defenses layered in ways that would take years to crack. Wells knew he didn't have that kind of time. He had to act fast. His fingers moved with a sense of urgency as he bypassed the first layers of security, trying not to think about how close they were to getting caught. The sounds of distant footsteps echoed down the hallways, and he could feel the pressure mounting. The Empire's forces were closing in, and they wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their most powerful asset. Lyra's voice broke through his concentration. "Hurry," she whispered urgently. "They're coming." Wells didn't look up. He couldn't afford to. The console flickered in response to his commands, showing him a schematic of the Empire's military network. It was sprawling, intricate, and unlike anything he had ever seen. Wells took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. The final weapon was within his reach. The AI that controlled the Empire's war machines was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. He just had to find the right weakness. He worked faster, his mind sharp despite the pressure. Lyra's presence by his side was a constant reminder of why he was doing this. This wasn't just about stopping an evil empire. It was about giving people like her a future, a chance to live free from the oppression that had defined their lives. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for a better tomorrow. The console beeped, and Wells's heart skipped a beat. He had found it. The central hub. the source of the Empire's eye control. He was moments away from unlocking its deepest secrets, and with them, the key to ending the war. Just as Wells initiated the final sequence, the doors to the control room slammed open with a deafening crash. Imperial soldiers flooded the room, their weapons raised and their expressions cold with malice. The soldiers didn't hesitate. They fired immediately, and Wells ducked, narrowly avoiding the deadly blasts. Lyra was already on her feet, moving faster than Wells could react. She fired back at the soldiers, her shots precise and deadly. Wells could hear the sounds of the skirmish behind him, but his focus remained on the console. He couldn't stop now. They were so close. The soldiers were relentless, but Lyra was faster. She moved like a blur, her every movement calculated and precise. Wells had never seen her fight like this before. The fear that had once held her back was gone, replaced by something fiercer, a determination to protect everything she had fought for. Wells's fingers danced across the keys, inputting the final code that would unleash the weapon. The console responded with a low hum, and the lights in the room flickered. For a moment, nothing happened. Wells's breath caught in his throat. Had he made a mistake? Then suddenly, the entire room was bathed in a brilliant white light. The AI network, the Empire's greatest weapon, began to crack. It was as if the very foundation of the Empire was being torn apart in front of them. The walls of the control room trembled, and the machines surrounding them powered down, one by one. The Imperial soldiers, realizing what was happening, backed away in fear. But it was too late. The Empire's grip on the galaxy was slipping, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Wells turned to look at Lyra, who had just finished taking down the last of the soldiers. Her chest heaved as she caught her breath, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. They had done it. The Empire's eye was no longer in control, but they weren't out of danger yet. The real fight was still to come. "We need to get out of here," Wells said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This place is going to fall apart any minute now." Lyra nodded, her face grim but determined. She moved to his side, and together they made their way toward the exit. But the room continued to shake, the walls cracking as the power of the Empire's AI network crumbled. They could feel the heat rising, the air thick with the scent of burning machinery. They had to leave. There was no time to waste. As they reached the door, Wells glanced back one last time. The control room, once the heart of the Empire's power, was now a burning ruin. The final weapon had been unleashed, and the Empire's reign of terror was over. But even as they sprinted toward safety, Wells knew the battle wasn't over. There would be more fighting, more bloodshed. But now, they had a chance. They had a weapon, a fighting force, and most importantly, they had hope. They had won the first battle in a war that would shape the future of the galaxy. And with Lyra by his side, Wells knew they would fight until the very end. The roar of the collapsing Empire echoed in the distance as Wells and Lyra made their way through the winding corridors, their hearts pounding in time with their hurried footsteps. The room they had left behind, the heart of the Empire, was a crumbling mess of sparks, fire, and fading lights. The weapon had worked, and in a matter of minutes, the powerful AI that had ruled over the galaxy for so long began to falter. But even though the battle was won, the war was far from over. The alarms had ceased, replaced by a quiet, unsettling stillness. It was the calm before the storm. Wells could feel it in his bones, the weight of what they had just unleashed. The Empire was falling, but there would be consequences. The chaos had only just begun. Lyra's voice broke through the tense silence. "What now?" Her tone was steady, but her eyes betrayed the uncertainty that was still lingering. She had come so far, fought so hard, and now that they had brought the Empire to its knees, it seemed impossible to believe that the fight was over. Wells looked at her, his expression tired but resolute. "Now we rebuild. Now we fight for a future." He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The Empire may have crumbled, but its remnants were still vast and powerful. The military would regroup, the loyalists would strike back, and the fight for freedom would continue. But this time, they had hope. This time, they had something worth fighting for. They reached the surface, and Wells took a deep breath, feeling the cool air of the planet's sky fill his lungs. The sun was beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the destroyed battlefield. It was a new day, and with it came a new beginning. The war was not over, but the odds had shifted. They had brought the Empire to its knees, and now it was time for the galaxy to rise. "Look at that," Lyra whispered, pointing toward the horizon where the first light of day was breaking. The sunrise was beautiful, but it was also a symbol of the fight they had ahead. The future was uncertain, but the darkness of the Empire was finally giving way to something brighter. Wells nodded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the distant landscape. "It's a new dawn," he said quietly. "But it's not over yet. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they made their way through the wreckage of the Imperial base, Wells couldn't help but think of all the lives lost in the battle. The soldiers who had sacrificed everything. The innocent civilians who had been crushed under the Empire's iron fist. The cost had been high, but the victory was worth it. The Empire was on the brink of collapse, and no amount of resistance could save it now. It was only a matter of time before the remnants of the regime would fall, and in its place, the galaxy would be free. But freedom came with a price. As much as Wells longed for peace, he knew that rebuilding a galaxy torn apart by years of war would not be easy. The people would need leaders, real leaders, who could guide them through the uncertainty that lay ahead. And though he hadn't asked for it, Wells found himself in a position where he would have to take on that responsibility. Lyra turned to him, her eyes searching his face for some hint of the future. "What happens now?" she asked again, the uncertainty in her voice still present. Wells paused for a moment, considering the weight of her question. What could he say? There were no easy answers. There would be no quick fixes. But the people of the galaxy deserved a chance to build something better. They deserved a chance to heal, to move forward. "We rebuild," Wells said, his voice steady. "We bring the galaxy together. We fight for the future, for the people who have been crushed under the Empire's rule. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we can make a new beginning. Together." Lyra smiled, the first real smile he had seen on her face in a long time. It was a small smile, but it was full of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, Wells felt a glimmer of that same hope. The road ahead would be long, but it was a road they could walk together. They had come this far, and now they would build a future from the ashes. As they stood there, looking out over the broken Empire, Wells realized something profound. The galaxy had been shaped by centuries of oppression. But now, in the wake of the Empire's fall, it was theirs to shape. The past had been written in blood, but the future, that was something they could control. It was a new dawn, a chance to rebuild, to create a galaxy of freedom and peace. But even as the thought settled in his mind, Wells knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be factions to deal with, old enemies to fight, and challenges that none of them could anticipate. The universe was vast, and its problems were just as big. But with every battle they had fought, every loss they had endured, they had proven something important, that they could face anything. Together, they could fight for a better future. Lyra stepped forward, her hand reaching out to him. Wells took it, feeling the warmth of her touch as the sun rose higher in the sky. Together, they had taken down the Empire. Together, they would rebuild the galaxy. It was a new dawn, and it was theirs to shape. As they walked toward the horizon, Wells couldn't help but think of all the possibilities. The world was broken, but it could be healed. The galaxy was scared, but it could be rebuilt. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The Empire was gone. The war was far from over, but there was now a flicker of hope in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The people would rise. The future was in their hands. It was a new dawn, and the beginning of everything.